Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol and welcome to the Jeep Wrangler. Now, I know, as I'm sure many of you do, that those things are utterly amazing off-road. In fact, there's a video on the channel I should put a card above right now. Last year I went out to Italy into the Dolomites and did some really serious off-roading with one of those. Massively impressive. But when I was there, when I was driving one, I just had this thought. I thought, is this a car that you could live with every day? Is this a car that you could actually do the miles in? We all know they're great off-road, but what are they like on-road? I mean, really, could you live with a Jeep Wrangler? Now, unusually for me, I'm actually filming this part of the review at the end of my week with this car. I've done 700 miles in this car this week, which is why it's dirty. So before any of you have a go at me, I know it's dirty, but hey, Jeeps look kind of more cool dirty. So before I give you my impressions and my findings from what's been a really interesting week with this car, I think it's worthwhile just having a walk round. If you're not familiar with the Jeep Wrangler, it's one of these cars that I just find fascinating, and I've really enjoyed having this car. And even more scarily is Mrs. Petrol ranks this car in her top 3 favourite press cars I've had in all the time I've been doing YouTube. But why? Let's start at the front. I mean, when I put some Instagram shots of this car the day it arrived, the very first comments were how big that bumper is at the front. It is ginormous. In fact, I reckon it's even big enough to drive a Jeep Wrangler across it. See, I told you, you can drive a Jeep across the bumper. But yeah, so we start at the front of the car. I really like the front end of the car. I'm not a big fan of the bumper. It is a bit big, but hey-ho. It's the iconic front grille of a Jeep. You can trace Jeep's heritage back to the original Willis Jeep in the Second World War. I just think it's a really smart front end of the car, but it is a big, imposing car, this. It has all the aerodynamics of a house brick, but it's got that utilitarian look. As you come down the side, you've got the big step plates to get into it. It's a pretty tall car to get into as well. But as I come down the side, one of the things I really like is there's quite a lot of G-Wagon in this car. It gets the looks, it gets the comments, it has the presence. But it's also got a mega party piece up its sleeve. Now, to be honest, I am probably more of a fan of the 2-door version of the Wrangler, but this big 4-door version is certainly more practical. But it's when you get round the back, it's got nice things like it's got a real proper tyre hanging on the back. But it's when you open the boot, which is a good size, and you think, this is nice. And then you look inside and you see kind of like a rollover bar and you think, what's going on there? Well, it's quite simple. This can come off. You can take the roof off of this car. In fact, you can even take the doors off. Now, I don't think you'd probably do that very often here in the UK, but if you lived in, I don't know, California or somewhere really nice and sunny, you can take the roof, the doors off, and this particular model has a full-length canvas retractable roof. So even though you're in a big kind of 5-seat SUV, you can drive along like you're in a convertible, and I think that's wicked. Boot space is pretty good. The seats drop and you can put loads and loads of gear in here. It's certainly a very practical car. I'm not a big fan of the fact that the glass part, you've got a split tailgate, but you can't lift the glass part up first. You have to open the door and then you lift this up, which is, I guess, it's a small thing. But I love the fact you can take the roof off basically from kind of here backwards. All of this can come off. It is a big job. I'm not going to do it today because you can do it on your own, but I think there's a bit of skill to it. But what's the rear seat passenger room like? I don't know whether you need to use that handle, but it's quite cool anyway. There's not nearly as much room in the back as I thought there would be. This seat is back for me as a driver, and my legs are banging up against it. But the seat's quite comfortable, and you've got power sockets and things. Interestingly, the window controls are centrally mounted here, because as I've said already, you can literally take the doors off if you want to and drive along without the doors and without the roof, which I think in the back seat would be quite cool. But let's jump in the front and have a chat about the important bit, the kind of driver's area and the cockpit, and what this car's like to drive. I do quite like the way you have to kind of climb up into the car. Now, driving position is quite upright, and the steering wheel's quite upright. And the dash I find quite interesting, because these cars have been around a long time and evolved from very utilitarian vehicles. But I think Jeep have managed to evolve the Wrangler far better than Land Rover ever did with the original Defender. It doesn't feel that basic in here. You've got all the toys. You've got a nice big screen here which has things like Apple CarPlay. It's all touch screen, but there's plenty of buttons for things like all your aircon controls. Again, your window controls are just here. 2 gear levers. This is an auto, but I've got a secondary gear lever for my different 4-wheel drive modes. By default, you're in a high-range 2-wheel drive mode. You can put it in high-range 4-wheel drive, or drop it into a low-range box when the going gets tough off-road. I'm not going to be doing that today, because I really wanted to see, first impressions are, you sit in this and you think, actually, this drives okay on the road. What's it going to be like for a long journey? And that's the purpose of this video. So let's talk about how that's gone this week, shall we? So, earlier this week, I had a big, long journey to do. It was about a 3-hour drive, and I thought it'd be really interesting to just document that journey. So let's see how I got on. So this is my long range test. I've just started out on a journey that is, according to my sat-nav, 187 miles, just over 3 hours. And the one thing you probably wouldn't think of when it comes to this car is doing lots and lots of miles in it on a motorway or dual carriageway. And having driven one of these quite a few times, I thought, do you know what, I reckon you could do. So, really simple test. As I said, 180 odd miles, bit of dual carriageway, bit of motorway, quite a lot of B road, so a nice mix of roads. And we'll just see how comfortable this car really is. The other thing to note, by the way, is I've got all the things that I personally would want out of a long journey. I've got somewhere to put a nice big water bottle. In fact, I could put 2 down there quite happily. And I've got my phone plugged into the car, and I'm using Apple CarPlay, so I can use my favourite sat-nav Waze. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of the inbuilt Jeep sat-nav, but to be fair, I haven't used it that much. Well, I've been going about an hour. I've done a mix of dual carriageway and actually quite a lot of B road, and so far very relaxing. The only thing I would say is, in terms of the size of the pedal box, where the pedals are, there doesn't really seem to be a comfortable place for me to put my left foot. I kind of put it almost around the back of the brake, or I can put it in front of the seat, but I just can't find myself a comfortable place to put my left foot, and that's just because the pedal box is quite narrow. And clearly this is an auto, so there's no clutch, but you could almost do with the space where a clutch would go for me to, or a footrest for me to put my foot on. But apart from that, very comfortable. The seat's actually pretty good, the driving position's pretty good, and it's a reasonably relaxing drive. The steering input, there's a little bit of play in the steering to start with. Just, I don't know, 10 mil, 15 mil either way, you can do that and the car doesn't actually change direction. But then when you do input the steering, it's quite a quick response, so that doesn't make it for a really relaxing drive, but you get used to it quite quickly. The other thing, just in terms of the suspension, clearly it's a very high car. It's got quite a kind of springy suspension setup, so you do feel a lot of roll in the car. And I guess that's, know, if you drive some of the more sport-oriented SUVs, they've got very kind of road car-like suspension. This is an out-and-out 4x4. I guess my benchmark would be, could you do this journey in an original Defender? And I'm not sure you could. Well, you could, but whether you'd be as relaxed as I am right now, that's a different story. We are very nearly at my destination, and I am happy to report, after pretty much 3 hours in this car, I don't have a numb bum, and I feel really relaxed and refreshed. And this journey's been really interesting because I've put the car through its paces across a range of different roads, amazing B roads like I'm on right now, dual carriageways, motorways. This is definitely a car that you could do long journeys in, do some miles. I like it, it's good. I think you'd have a more relaxing journey in a saloon car or an estate car, but if you like the high-up driving position, the quirkiness of a Jeep Wrangler, and it's maybe the only car that you can have, you can't have a second car to do the longer journeys in, and you're thinking, oh, could I use that car really every day? What if I needed to do 200, 300, 400 mile journey? Is it going to be all right? Well, the simple answer to that is, yeah, it's going to be all right. You're going to have actually a really simple journey. And even when you get it onto a little bit of twisty road like this, you're going to enjoy yourself. So as you can see, it actually was a really pleasant place to be for that amount of time. It really surprised me. You can sit on the motorway at motorway speeds in one of these things. And a couple of extra bits of information which really surprised me. First things first, on a full tank, this car will do about 500 miles, which is a long way. Now, to do that, it's a very big tank. I think a 3/4 fill cost me about £70. So it's not a cheap thing to fill up, but average fuel economy over my 700 miles, I've done 30 miles to the gallon average. And that's actually about 5 miles to the gallon better than Jeep say it should do. So I'm not quite sure how I've been doing that. So actually, as a proposition for longer journeys, it's comfortable. And it's relatively economic, and you can go a long way before you have to fill up. And that surprised me. The big question is, what's it like when it gets tight and twisty? Now, sadly, I had planned some really cool B roads in Wales where I was this week, but unfortunately, each time I wanted to film, by the time I actually got in the car, it had gone dark. So instead, we're going to head over into the South Downs to some of my local B roads, and I can talk about what this car's like on a B road, because it shouldn't be any good at that. So let's start off this little bit of the review by just talking about what's under the bonnet, because when you look at the spec sheet, you think, really? So it's only got a 2-litre engine, and that produces 200 horsepower and about 400 newton meters. And you think, is that going to be enough? Surely that's going to be gutless in a car of this size. Surely it should have, I don't know, a V6 or a V8 or something. Well, surprisingly, this car's actually quite sprightly. So don't be put off by the size of the engine, because you really, when you're actually driving it, you don't notice. It goes to an automatic box. Now, all I would say about the gearbox is it is really lazy. So if you want to accelerate and kick down, there are noticeable lags, time lags, pauses between when you do something with your right foot and when the engine actually responds and the gearbox kicks down. And that, for me, the challenge is, if you do want to push on a little bit down a B road and have a bit of fun, the gearbox is the thing that's going to hold you back. But I guess I would forgive it, because I'm pretty sure that the main thing this gearbox has been designed for is for its off-roading capabilities, not for bombing down a B road and doing circuit driving and that kind of stuff. All that said, though, it is it's okay. You can go into a manual gear change if you want to. There aren't any flappy paddles, but you can use the gear lever down here. I haven't done that, if I'm honest. I've just driven it around in normal auto. Next thing to just briefly talk about is the steering. And the steering, as I mentioned on my long journey, it's a little bit vague for the first couple of inches of input, and then the wheels actually move and you start having some steering feel. The challenge then is when it does move, the front end is quite sharp and the steering input is, you know, it's almost like you've got nothing and then everything, and that means that you often find yourself kind of driving down the road not in a straight line, and that's a little bit disconcerting, especially if you want to have a bit of fun down a B road. It's a bright sunny day. It's pretty cold out there though, but I do think we should experience the full length sunroof in this thing. I don't know, it's a little thing, but it's quite a cool feature. Now, just in terms of, while this is going back, in terms of cost, these on the road price is about 49,500 quid. That's all the way back. There you go. We are now in a soft top SUV. This car actually only has two options on it. It has the technology pack and it has that roof, and that means that this car is about 52 grand, which I know is a lot of money, but it's very nicely spec'd. So lazy gearbox and questionable steering aren't really the ingredients for great handling, but let's give it a go. And it is pretty sprightly off the mark. The other thing that isn't going to help the handling is this car's suspension setup is really made for brilliant off-roading capability. The car's very high, it has a very high centre of gravity, it has a lot of body roll, and you can feel the axle articulation and stuff as you're going around the corners. So all of those things mean that this car should be utterly rubbish at going down a B road. But you know what? It's not. It's great fun. And I think it's great fun because it's not brilliant at it. You can feel the car, in fact you probably see the car moving around. You have to put constant inputs into the steering. The brakes are pretty good actually, and when you get to a corner it's like a combination of turning and hope and almost being impressed that it manages to go around the corner. And that means it's actually really good fun to drive off-road, and it's really good fun to drive on-road, which makes it just great fun to drive. It's one of those cars that it will surprise you. You'll sit there and go, oh, I don't want to drive a Jeep. Drive one, you'll be surprised. So what are my final impressions of this Jeep Wrangler? I really, really like it. It's not without fault by any stretch of the imagination, but it's got this weird way of letting you forget all of the things it's not great at, and you just fall in love with it. It's got so much character, and honestly you get so much attention. I think people love it. It's got that kind of G-Wagon utilitarian feel. One thing I haven't mentioned, by the way, this is a reasonably highly spec special edition one, so it has carpets. But if you want to get a real proper utilitarian Wrangler, you get the ones with the kind of rubber matting. You can jet wash them out. You just take the doors off and get your jet washer in. So when you've been out and about with your muddy boots, it doesn't matter, and I love that. And what I also love about Jeep is there's this mega community of Jeep owners. Having been to Camp Jeep and met a lot of them, they're quite fanatical about all things Jeep, to be honest. And honestly, after spending a week with one of these things, I totally get it. I've even been on Auto Trader and been having a look at, I'd get a short wheelbase Rubicon and I'd be a happy bunny. I love it that much. I really, really do. But anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed that one. A bit of fun. I know I haven't done off-roading in it for this video, but honestly, these are so good off-road, you need to go absolutely full bore, balls out off-road to really make any, there's no point in doing it otherwise, and I just didn't have the opportunity to do that this week. And this video was all about living with the car and doing lots of miles, and it's safe to say you can do that. This car is actually a car you can do lots of miles in. It's comfortable, it's relatively economic, it's massively practical, and I love it. I really do. Massive thanks to Jeep UK for letting me play with their car for a week, and I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have done so, please give me a thumbs up. Comments below are always welcome, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol Bed for plenty more content to come. And I'll see you on the next film. You take care, guys. Drive safe.